Hi everyone, welcome to 345 Tech Talks again, and today we're going to talk about managing data in a data lake. I'm here again with Paul, who's my co-conspirator in 345 and the source of knowledge of all things technical. So, Paul, let's just talk about, let's just talk about this whole thing. Just introduce the topic briefly. We're talking about managing data in a data lake. So where do you start?
Probably just recap on what is a data lake, right?
Yeah.
So
as we learned last time, a data lake is just somewhere you stick everything.
yes.
But when it goes in, you say what it is so that you can get it out again.
Pretty much, yeah. And you store gargantuan amounts of data.
Huge amounts of data.
In all sorts of different formats.
Yeah, and you just
store your data, you worry about the analytics later.
Yeah, and obviously, anyone who is like, and anyone that's involved in any sort of data governance would just go pale at the thought of that. That here's this place, you stick everything in it, and then it's just all there, and everyone can look at it.
I can imagine people would go.
And so one of the things we're going to talk about today really is to look at the issues involved and how we then tackle them. So first thing is, with a data lake, do you just have one that everyone uses, or would you have more than one?
Well, I mean, you could have one. So I guess it's entirely up to the business as to whether they have one. Although I think the general consensus is that you would almost certainly have more than one, because there will be potentially restrictions on the data, the types of data that go in it from the perspective of people accessing that data. So you might have, maybe some sort of regulatory reason why you need to separate data from other data.
This is going to follow from the complexity of your business, though, isn't it? So if you've got a huge, let's say you've got an international bank. You're operating in different countries. You've got different, each country's got its own division, and then within that you've got the different thing. You've got the different areas. You might have a treasury function. You might have, commercial banking. You might have investment banking. You've got all these different. In that sense, you might have loads. If you're an internet startup that just runs one piece of software, you probably have one. It's kind of it goes with the complexity of the terrain, doesn't
it? It does, yeah, absolutely. So I mean, the international bank is a good example, because banks will have different territories that they operate in, and those territories might have particular restrictions on where you can store data. For example, in the EU, there are,
or not anymore,
or not for us. There are rules around storing data outside the EU that you can't.
Yeah.
There might be.
And this thing is also that's governed by international treaty. I mean, this isn't even a technical thing. It's literally a thing of treaty. Treaties between nations in terms of how you can store data and where you can store it.
Absolutely. And also the large international bank will potentially have lots of different business functions. And those different business functions might require their data to be separate, to be entirely separate from other business functions, particularly where the sensitivities of that data is different.
So what are the key kind of dividing lines then that we'd be looking at? because obviously sovereignty is one of them that you mentioned, and you kind of touched on regulatory, and then regulatory is, there can be a number of threads in regulatory. So there's things like, is it personally identifiable, I suppose, is a, but that might not necessarily decide which data lake it goes in. But you've also got, what it's going to be, who's going to access it, the security aspect of it.
Yeah.
That that generally speaking, if you put, if you've got data that's got lots of different access classifications all in the same place, it becomes much harder to manage. So so accessibility, who can access it, security is definitely a big part of that, isn't it?
It is, and you're absolutely right. So if you think of the data lake like a file system, and certainly some of the cloud ones where you can apply almost an access control list, permissions to an individual object in the data lake. That's all well and good up to the point where you're dealing with millions upon millions of objects, and the complexity of managing all of those objects from an individual permission level. So, and of course the implementation of data lakes will make that easier or harder depending on how they've implemented it. But some organizations will just go, I just don't want that data being mixed in the same place. So I just want almost the firewall of having two separate data lakes, just completely two separate services, so that there can be no accidental mixing of data, accidentally making a permission change and opening up sensitive data to a wider group of people. So you just don't get that if you have separate instances of data lake. So you can understand that defense organizations, Ministry of Defense, I can imagine that they wouldn't want any of their top secret data mixing it with much lower classification data. So obviously it's all entirely up to the organization how they slice and dice their data sets, but it's you can understand that the usefulness of having separate data lakes to ensure good separation of data. It's a bit like when you have multi-tenant systems, where you have you build one system but multiple customers can access it. So do you have a database per tenant, or do you have one database and you actually separate the records themselves by which tenant?
Is it logically based on the records, or is it So
it's a similar challenge really with data lakes.
And so in terms of governance then, what are the, again, a glib and easy thing to say, so I'll say it, is that plan ahead with this stuff, because it's really hard to put it in later. The governance is something that the more you get it right in advance, the less of a headache you have later on. If you kind of know what the issues are now, it's going to be a lot easier when you design your data lake to make sure that the right things are in place. Because if you get it wrong, bad things, there's immensely bad things can happen from your data being, from having the wrong security or the wrong classification and all that sort of thing.
Accidentally opening it up to people, whether that's in your organization, or even worse, publicly opening it up accidentally to everybody to look at. Particularly with data protection these days is such a hot topic. I mean, it is the mainstream media will gladly report on data protection breaches.
And if you get it wrong, no one's got any sympathy, have they?
No, exactly.
I mean, I think a lot
really,
of us, yeah, we kind of instinctively feel that companies that have data on us have got, fundamentally they've got some kind of power over us, or there's something there to that our own sovereignty of our data is versus other people having sovereignty of our data is actually it's one of the big kind of issues of the age that people can't really put it into the right words, but if you get it wrong, no one's there to help you. it's so take that stuff seriously and take it seriously from day one. Security access control is one of them. There's also the life cycle of it. Some data has to be, has got a time to live, and beyond that, you can't. I mean, especially with personally identifiable information. If a customer ceases to be your customer, if a customer says you can't hold the data on me, then there are limits in terms of legislation of what you can keep and how long you can keep it, and those are things that you have to be able to meet.
Yeah, I mean, look at GDPR. GDPR very specific rules around. One, you can go to any organization and say, tell me what you know about me. Tell me everything you know about me. And then two, you say, I want you to remove all trace of me in your system.
So that's a really interesting thing, though, isn't it? Because how far do you have to go in that? So let's say you're a bank and you've got branches. Those branches have got CCTV. The CCTV is in the data lake. Customer comes into the branch. They're on your data. It's like, how far do you go? It's a tough one, isn't it? And also, it's if you've got all these blobs of data in your data lake, how do you know which bits are personally identifiable and to whom?
It's a challenge. So I mean, obviously the CCTV example is definitely a challenge because you may not have processed that data at that point. So one, should you be processing it to identify individual people in the CCTV stream, or
is that just going to make it worse?
Or is that going to make it worse? So what do you do in that instance? But in the cases where you actually do have structure around the data that says, okay, this record is associated with Andrew Rivers, then I know that record exists. So in theory, I should be able to find that data in the data lake. But you've got to say, should you be putting personally identifiable information, data that has personally identifiable information into a data lake in the first place? Because, why do you put data into a data lake? You do so, you don't treat it as a transactional system. You treat it as a place where you can then do analytics from. So do you need to have personally identifiable information inside a data lake in order to do analytics? You could argue that actually, no, you don't, because you do analytics to gain insights, and you gain insights not by knowing necessarily that you are Andrew Rivers and you bought a product from a local store. You're actually probably more interested in the demographics of it.
Yeah, so instead of me being an identifiable thing, I could just be person X that lives in this postcode, is this age, and that sort of thing. And that might and by doing that, okay, you could so let's say if I've got multiple transactions, you can still say person X has done, has been shopping on this day, this day, this day, and this day, without them knowing it's me. But in terms of analysis, you can probably still answer the question from that. So again, this comes back to the whole thing of pre-planning, isn't it? Because you have to pre-plan that governance, because otherwise, if you just say, oh, I'm just going to stick that data in there, then either you have to process it afterwards to pull out who it belongs to, and then you've got to go through that whole headache, or you can clean it on the way in to say, so okay, all this stuff here is, this is customer transactions for analysis, but it's been anonymized, so therefore you don't have to worry about it.
Exactly, it's knowing your data, and almost knowing that the use of this data, it's not important to have that personal data in there. Sanitize it on the way in. And then, from a GDPR perspective, somebody says, what do you know about me? Well, in terms of actual personally identifiable information.
Yeah, it's the stuff that's in your CRM or whatever. And
exactly, yeah, it wouldn't be in the data lake.
And it wouldn't just be leaking out everywhere else.
Absolutely. Yeah, because everybody loves to read a good story of a data breach, right? So because as people in IT, we look at that and sort of shake our heads, but you can understand with very large businesses with huge amounts of data that occasionally processes break down. And
I'll tell you a story. I mean, this isn't necessarily data lake, but many years ago, stressed to say many years ago, probably over 15 years ago, I was running the development team, and we financial business, and we got some penetration testing done, and when they came in to present the results of the pen test, it was horrifying, because the first thing they did was they showed an XML document with customer name, their credit card number, and the amount of money, and it was like, how the hell have they got this? Where the hell have they? And obviously at some point it was like they were packet sniffing, and something that should have been secure wasn't. But just that sinking feeling of, oh my God, where did they get that credit card number from? It was just, so I've actually been, fortunately this was found, and this didn't leak outside. This was found in pen testing, and we fixed it, put the correct security stuff in place. But just that sinking feeling of that coming up, and you can only imagine what that feels like when it's not done by your pen testers, but it's done by the newspaper.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that obviously is stress good system hygiene, right? So making sure that you do regular security testing.
I mean, there's a kind of, but even with this though, and going back on the data lake thing, I mean, we sort of on the one hand we said put everything in your data lake, but then we're also saying, well, actually clean it first, then put it in, and it's and both of those are valid. It's just it's known when it's appropriate to do either of those, isn't it?
Yeah, so we're going back to the ETL versus ELT, right? It's sort of, so if you're sanitizing on the way in, which is, I think, it's a good idea, because you don't want to store it and sanitize it and store it again, because you've already got the original stored. So sanitize on the way in. So you're sort of in the ETLT arena. So, but yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think, other than anonymizing data, you might.
Yeah, there's anonymizing and there's redaction, isn't there?
Yeah, but that would be probably the only, to the extent of the sort of transform that you might do for data going into a data lake, because you don't want to do too much, because unless of course that you're going to be using that data for for a particular report straight away, then you probably don't really want to be doing too much transform on the way in. Just do all of your transform on the way out when you want to consume it.
So what other kind of what other kind of considerations are there for governance then? We've kind of talked about particularly the sensitivity, particularly things like personal identifiable information or that sort of thing. There's the security and who can access it, the sovereignty. Is there anything we've missed off that people would be worrying about with governance? And
so there's a couple of things probably. So audit.
Yeah.
So although the data lake is almost a place where you just sort of dump data. Hesitate to say that, but yeah, you sort of dump data, but you still want to audit access to that data. So you want to make sure that you've got your auditing set up.
So because just the term audit kind of means different things to different people, but what we're saying is maintaining the trail of who's accessed what.
Yeah, it's the access control.
And that's kind of the in terms of security defenses, that's kind of a non-repudiation kind of thing, isn't it? So when someone comes along later after having leaked your data and you say, well, you accessed it here, and they say, no, I didn't. And you say, well, you do, because we've got, we can trace who's accessed what.
Absolutely, and you can then alert off audit that is not expected. So if somebody accesses data that you are not expecting them to access, then you can alert.
And I mean, this is things like police databases have had this in for decades, because actually who's accessing someone's actual police record is actually a really sensitive thing. So they've had that for ages. It's companies have been a long way behind that in terms of who's accessing what.
Yeah.
Mainly because I think a lot of companies have grown up without really having the any guidelines in place, and then which is why kind of GDPR has been such a wake-up call to everyone around here, because it's suddenly like, well, here's a load of guidelines, you've got to abide by them.
Yeah, and if you don't, we can now fine you. I think is it unlimited fines for GDPR now compared to what it was before? I think it's unlimited.
Yeah, I mean,
which is certainly a wake-up call for organisations that play fast and loose with data.
Yeah. So I think that's that's definitely been that's definitely a thing, but also it's reputational damage as well. I mean, it's reputational damage very quickly leads to loss of customer confidence, which very quickly leads to more financial damage. So there's big lesson there is get this stuff right, take it seriously.
Absolutely.
And then everything will be okay. And if you need us to give you some advice on that, then we're more than happy to do so. But just take it seriously. So one of the things we just kind of didn't, we've had on our list to talk about. We've given time to kind of talking about the things that are good about a data lake when it's done well, and when it's done well, you've got you've probably got the right number of data lakes in the right jurisdictions, and you've got the right metadata, the right access control, all that sort of stuff. What's it look like when it goes wrong? It's like the anti-pattern. What does a data lake anti-pattern look like?
So just the exact opposite of what we've been talking about. throw your data in a data lake, give it no structure, give it no thought to how you might name objects. Don't use a metadata store, so you can't find your data. have no governance over it. No auditing, don't set any retention policies. You don't know whether the provenance of your data is quite important as well. Don't capture that. It's the term for that is a data swamp. So, which I love again. Data wrangling and data swamp, I think, are great terms. But
so there needs to be a kind of a term for the person that goes and fixes the data swamp. It's like what's the equivalent of like the drains guy that turns up with a
yeah.
Turns up with the plunger and says, I'm going to fix your swamp.
Yeah. And really a lot of that is, fundamentally comes down to data must be discoverable.
Yeah.
If you can't find your data, if you can't discover your data, then
basically it's just a load of useless binary, isn't it?
Yeah. And technically
you're just filling disks up with rubbish. If you can't use it, you can't find it, you can't use it, then it's just rubbish, isn't it?
Yeah, the data is, a swamp is sort of the place where you don't want to go wading around in, voluntarily. Whereas a lake, lovely, clean, go swimming.
But I'm just trying to think, how easy or difficult is it to get that to go wrong? I mean, it's because once you get, how easy is it to sort of pollute your data lake, and I suppose the thing is how can you then go and back that stuff out? If you get one team that goes rogue and sticks a load of stuff in your data lake, it's like how.
But just think,
you've got most of the lake's all right, and you're swimming around there, but one end's got a load of weeds in it. I mean, it's
it's got a bit of a stagnant end. Yeah,
a bit of a stagnant end, a bit of algae in there.
Yeah. Well, just think about, how easy, how hard is it to keep a good folder structure on your own disk? Because you might start off with the best intentions of making sure everything's nice and neatly categorized, and then occasionally things just start to go wrong, and then you end up with
and especially goes wrong when some categorizations are it kind of so let's say marketing spends some money. Does that go in the marketing thing, or does it go in finance?
Yeah, so you end up with sort of that,
and then you start having all this, and they're just you have this sort of blurred line between categories, and then suddenly it's where is this stuff? Because one person will stick it over there, one person stick it over there, and before you know it, you haven't got the consistency. So
exactly, we use SharePoint and we store documents in there, and we're normally fairly fastidious about the structure, but even then you go, why is that document in there when we and it's so it's easy enough for us to fix, but it's it's very easy to go wrong, and unintentionally. It's not like you're deliberately attempting to sort of have poor control over the data. It's just that occasionally things just sort of go into a format and you think, well, it's really make any sense.
So when it goes wrong at scale, it's quite hard to unpick.
Yes, yeah. If you're talking, terabytes plus of data, and it's now been categorized incorrectly or it's in the wrong place.
Yeah, I mean that's and obviously if you're just going to delete it, then that's one thing. But if actually that's data that you need to keep, then that starts to become a proper project in its own right. Just cleaning up the mess, and those are projects that you don't want to be running, because ultimately that it's big amounts of money that you're spending that isn't really helping your business other than cleaning up a mess that shouldn't be there in the first place.
Yeah, and the same applies to the metadata store, assuming that is a separate store that has pointers to your data. You could argue that actually the metadata store is really important to keep clean, because that is how you find your data.
Yeah.
And what happens if you have a record in there you find some data and you got, well, that's exactly the data I want, but the pointer to it, to the data doesn't exist anymore. So you go to find the data, it's like, well, it's not there. So it's about making sure that if you do, if you are cleaning data, that your metadata store is also kept up to date with any movement of data underneath in the data lake. So yeah, there's it's definitely a challenge.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to sort of let's just recap then, because we've covered a sweeping terrain of data issues. So in a data lake, you've got to know what's in there. You've got to be able to control who can access it. You've got to know when you've got to make sure it's clean so that you don't get in trouble for having it later. You've got to have the right access control, but also to know who's accessed what. And you've got to know what data you're allowed to keep in the right country. And think of all this stuff in advance and get it right in advance, because if not, then actually, so whilst, so data is the, it can be the source, the biggest source of your competitive advantage, but it can also be your biggest Achilles heel. And I think that's the, that's the sort of the thing, isn't it? That it can either transform, or it can hurt, and you get it right at the start.
Yeah, absolutely. Planning is essential.
Planning, have the right policies, the right governance, and then everything else flowing from that should be good.
Absolutely.
So on that note, I think we'll wrap up, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next time. All right, bye now.